She was dying alone in a freezing barn, abandoned by everyone she once helped. Her stomach screamed with hunger. Her body shook from cold she couldn't escape. The people who called her a friend had left her to die like an animal. But on the night she was ready to give up, a stranger walked through that door and changed everything. Winter had turned cruel. The wind didn't just blow, it screamed. It raced across empty fields like a beast looking for prey. Snow covered everything in sight. Fences disappeared. Roads vanished. Hope seemed buried under all that white. Far away from any town stood an old barn. Its walls leaned to one side. The roof had holes. The wood was rotting. Nobody remembered it was even there. Inside that forgotten place, a woman lay curled up on the frozen ground. She looked more like a skeleton than a living person. Her name was Valora Finch, and she was starving to death. Her lips had cracked open and bled. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking no matter how hard she tried to control them. Deep in her belly, pain twisted like a knife. Sharp. Burning. Constant. She hadn't eaten in days. 3 days. 4. She couldn't remember anymore. When you're starving, time stops making sense. Every breath felt like lifting a heavy stone. Each one harder than the last. Snow pushed through the broken barn walls and hit her skin like frozen needles. She pulled her torn coat tighter, but it did nothing. The cold had already crawled into her bones. It felt permanent. Like it would never leave. Valora used to be strong. People traveled from far away just to ask for her help. Now even the mice stayed away from her. She dragged her weak body across the hay. Her arms barely worked. Finally, she reached a small window covered in frost. With trembling fingers, she wiped the ice away and looked outside. Not far from the barn sat a farmhouse. Dark. Silent. Dead-looking. No smoke came from the chimney. No lights glowed in the windows. Nothing moved. Just weeks ago, that house had been full of food. Bags of flour stacked to the ceiling. Dried meat hanging on hooks. Jars of vegetables lined up on shelves like soldiers. All of it, gone. Stolen. Stolen by the same people who used to thank her with smiles and prayers. Valora remembered their faces perfectly. Neighbors she'd known her whole life. Men whose wounds she'd cleaned and sewn shut. Women whose babies she'd helped deliver into this world. They had stood outside her door with fear in their eyes. That fear twisted their familiar faces into something ugly and cruel. The town pastor pointed at the red birthmark on her neck. He called it a devil's mark. When 3 children died from sickness that winter, the town needed someone to blame. Valora was an easy target. When her husband Samuel tried to defend her, they beat him. They hit him until he couldn't stand straight. Then they dragged both of them to the town square while snow fell all around. The crowd watched in silence as the pastor gave them a choice that wasn't really a choice. Leave town forever, or burn alive. That same night, Valora and Samuel ran into the winter darkness wearing only the clothes on their backs. They walked until their feet bled. Until their lungs burned. Until they couldn't walk anymore. They never made it far enough. Samuel didn't survive the journey. The cold, the hunger, and the beating were too much for his broken body. He died right here in this barn. His breathing got weaker and weaker while Valora held his hand and begged him not to go. When he was gone, she buried him as best she could in the frozen ground outside. With shaking fingers, she carved his name into a wooden cross. Every day since then, she scratched a new mark into the barn wall. Counting. 32 marks stared back at her now. 32 days of surviving without him. Valora sank to her knees in the hay. She grabbed the silver pendant hanging around her neck. Her grandmother had given it to her years ago. It was the only thing she managed to hide when the angry mob came. She told herself she'd trade it for food if she reached the next town. But the next town was too far away. In her condition, she'd collapse and die before getting halfway there. The wind howled outside like a wounded animal screaming in pain. Her stomach answered with its own sharp cry. For the first time since Samuel died, tears filled her eyes. Maybe death would be kinder than this slow torture. Suddenly, the barn door slammed open. Cold air rushed inside along with snow and darkness. Valora scrambled backward, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. A huge shadow filled the doorway. She thought the mob had returned to finish what they started. But it wasn't the mob. It was a stranger. He stood tall and wide, carrying an axe over his shoulder. Snow clung to his heavy coat. He filled the barn like a wall made of muscle and shadow. "Who's there?" a deep voice demanded. The voice was rough and powerful, like the sound of wood splitting. "This is private land." Valora pressed herself against the wall. Her throat felt too tight to speak. She barely had the strength anyway. "Please," she whispered. "I have nowhere else to go." The stranger stepped inside and shut the door against the storm. As her eyes adjusted, she saw him clearly. He had a thick, dark beard and arms built from years of hard work. His eyes moved across the barn, then stopped on her frail body. "You're from Belwick," he said. The name made her flinch. "Not anymore," she replied weakly. His gaze dropped to her hollow cheeks and shaking hands. Something changed in his expression. He set the axe down carefully and reached into his coat. He pulled out a small cloth bundle. When he opened it, the smell hit her like a beautiful dream. Bread. Warm bread and cheese. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She couldn't remember. "It doesn't matter," she said. "It does to me," he replied. "Eat." Her hands trembled as she took the food. She forced herself not to eat like a wild animal. Each bite felt painful and wonderful at the same time. "Why are you helping me?" she asked between bites. "I'm not looking for payment," he said. "Just eat." Tears ran down her face as she finished the bread. When she looked up, he was watching her quietly. He stood in a way that blocked the worst of the cold wind. "My mother was burned as a witch when I was 10, he said softly. For growing plants they didn't understand. Something inside Valora broke open. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen by another human being. "My cabin is 3 miles north," he continued. "There's a fire and more food. You can come if you can walk." She nodded, unable to speak. "My name is Thorley Blackwood," he said, offering his rough hand. "Can you walk, Valora Finch? Or will I carry you?" As the storm raged outside, Valora placed her fragile hand in his. She didn't know why fate sent this lonely lumberjack to her that night. She only knew one thing. Her life had just changed. The first step inside Thorley Blackwood's cabin stole Valora's breath. Not because it was fancy, but because it was warm. Real warmth wrapped around her body and sank into her skin like something she'd forgotten existed. The fire in the stone fireplace burned steady and bright. Its orange light danced across rough wooden walls. The smell of pine smoke and hot soup filled the small space and made her knees weak. "Sit," Thorley said, pointing to a chair near the fire. Valora lowered herself slowly. Her legs shook as feeling returned in sharp, painful waves. The heat stung, but she welcomed it. Only now did she understand how close she'd come to dying. Life was slowly coming back into her body. It hurt, but it was a good kind of pain. Thorley moved around the cabin with quiet purpose. He poured hot soup into a wooden bowl and set it in front of her with another piece of bread. "Slow," he warned. "Your stomach won't forgive you if you rush." She obeyed, taking careful sips. The soup was simple, but it tasted richer than any meal she could remember. "Why help me?" she asked softly. Thorley sat across from her. The firelight turned his dark beard a warm copper color. For a long moment, he said nothing. "Because no one helped us," he finally replied. "When they came for my mother." Valora lowered her spoon. "You said they burned her." He nodded. "They called her a witch when the mayor's son died of fever. She used healing plants. That was enough." "And your father?" Valora asked. Thorley's jaw tightened. "He couldn't live with it. Took his own life months later. I was sent away. Grew up cutting timber." "I'm sorry." "It wasn't your doing," Thorley replied. Then he looked at her and added, "Just like what happened in Belwick wasn't yours." Something loosened in her chest at those words. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear them. "You can stay here tonight," Thorley said, adding another log to the fire. "Tomorrow we'll see how strong you are." "Tomorrow," Valora repeated. The word felt strange, like it belonged to someone else. She looked around the cabin and noticed signs of a lonely life. One bed against the wall. One cup near a small desk. One chair beside the fire. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. "Yes," he said. After a pause, he added, "Not tonight." Before she could answer, sudden pounding shook the cabin door. Valora froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Thorley's expression hardened. He crossed the room and grabbed a shotgun from the corner. "Get into the cellar," he said quietly, pointing to a hidden door beneath the rug. "Now." She barely had time to climb down before angry voices filled the cabin. "Blackwood, open up," a man shouted. "We know the witch is here." Valora pressed herself against the dirt wall below. Jars of preserved food lined the shelves beside her. Her breath came fast and shallow. "There's no witch here," Thorley replied calmly above her. "Just me and my dinner." "We followed her tracks," another voice argued. "Then you followed wrong," Thorley said. "Only tracks out there are mine." Boots shuffled. Men argued. Then one voice rose above the rest. Silas Pewitt, head of the Belwick Council. "We have the right to search," Pewitt declared. "You're on my land," Thorley answered. "Leave." The sound of the shotgun being cocked echoed through the cabin. Valora clutched her pendant and prayed. "We'll be back," Silas snarled. "Bring whoever you want," Thorley replied. "Now go." Footsteps retreated. Voices faded. Silence returned. The hidden door opened and Thorley offered his hand. "They're gone. For now." Valora climbed out, her legs trembling. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Yes," Thorley said. "But not tonight." She straightened as best she could. "I should leave. I've put you in danger." Thorley stepped between her and the door. "And go where?" "Anywhere else. You won't survive the night," he said. "And I won't throw you back into the cold." "Why?" she asked, tears filling her eyes. "Why fight for me?" "Because I know what it looks like," he said quietly, "when fear decides a woman's fate." Valora sank into the chair, exhausted. "My husband died because of them." "Tell me about him," Thorley replied. She did. Slowly, she spoke of Samuel's kindness, his love for Spring, and the way he believed in her even when she doubted herself. Thorley listened without interrupting. "Honor that belief," he said when she finished. "By living." As dawn came toward the cabin windows, Thorley packed supplies. "We leave at first light," he said. "I know places they won't search." "We?" Valora asked. "You won't make it alone." She slept deeply for the first time in weeks. They traveled north through thick forest, far from roads and towns. Thorley moved with quiet confidence, reading the land like a map. When they stopped to rest, he caught rabbits with practiced ease and shared the meat with her. "Where are we going?" Valora finally asked. "To my mother's people," Thorley replied. "My grandmother still lives." "Will they accept me?" she asked. Thorley met her eyes. "If my grandmother does, they all will." That night, as the forest fell silent, figures appeared from the darkness. Men with weapons stepped forward, watching carefully. "Hunters," Thorley said, speaking to them in a language Valora didn't understand. After a tense exchange, the men lowered their weapons. "They'll take us to camp," Thorley said. "The elders will decide." The camp lay hidden in a sheltered valley, protected from the worst wind. Fires glowed inside bark-covered homes. The air smelled of smoke, pine, and cooked meat. Valora felt many eyes on her, but they weren't filled with hatred. An elderly woman with silver braids stepped forward. Her back was straight. Her gaze was sharp. She studied Valora as if weighing her soul. Thorley lowered his head. "Grandmother." The old woman touched his face, then turned to Valora and spoke softly. Thorley listened, then translated. "She asks what burden you carry." Valora swallowed. "Tell her I was called a witch because I tried to heal. Tell her I lost my home, my husband, and nearly my life because of fear." The woman listened, then laughed. Not cruelly, but warmly. She spoke again. Thorley smiled. "She says only foolish people fear healers. You may stay." That night, Valora slept in warmth among strangers who didn't hate her. For the first time since Samuel's death, her dreams weren't filled with snow and hunger. But peace didn't last. 2 days later, Thorley returned from hunting with a grim look. "Men from Belwick are gathering," he said. "They blame you for sickness in their livestock." Valora's hands tightened around her medicine pouch. "The water. It was poisoned before I even saw the signs." "They're coming here," Thorley said. "With ropes." Fear rose in her chest, but it didn't control her. "Then I need to face them," she said. Thorley stared at her. "They won't listen." "They will if children are at risk," she replied. "And I can prove it." As torches appeared at the edge of the forest, Valora stood taller than she ever had before. Winter had tried to kill her. Fear had tried to erase her. But she wasn't finished yet. Rain began to fall as the mob reached the forest edge. Torches hissed and went dim as water soaked the burning cloth, but the men pushed forward anyway. Anger drove them harder than any storm could. Ropes hung from their shoulders. Fear sat in their eyes. Thorley stood firm at the front of the clearing, his shotgun lowered but ready. The people of the camp gathered behind him, silent and watchful. Valora stepped forward beside him. Her shoulders were straight. Her hands were steady. "I will speak," she said loudly. Shouts answered her. Accusations flew like stones. Silas Pewitt pushed his way to the front, his face red with rage. "You've cursed our town," he shouted. "Our cattle are dying. Our children are sick again." "No," Valora said calmly. Her voice carried despite the rain. "Your water has been poisoned." Laughter broke out among the men, sharp and mocking. "You expect us to believe that?" Silas sneered. "Yes," Valora replied. "Because it's the truth. The mining camp upstream has been dumping waste into the creek. Mercury. It sickens animals first, then people." The crowd shifted. Whispers spread. Doubt crept into a few faces. "It killed your children last winter," Valora continued. "Not me." The town pastor stepped forward slowly. "If this is true, how do we know?" "Test the water," Valora answered. "Stop drinking from the creek. Use the East Spring. You'll see the sickness fade. A man near the back spoke up, his voice uncertain. The symptoms do fit. Silas lunged forward in fury. She lies. Before he could reach her, a half-starved dog burst from the camp. The same dog Valora had healed months ago. It leaped forward and bit Silas's leg, sending him crashing into the mud. Chaos erupted. Men shouted. Torches fell. Fear turned inward. Enough, the pastor shouted. We will test the water. By dawn, sick children lay inside Thorley's cabin. The same place meant to hide Valora now became a place of healing. She worked without rest. She made teas, mixed medicines, cooled fevers, and whispered calm words to frightened parents. The same parents who hours earlier wanted her dead. Thorley stayed by her side, lifting children, bringing clean water, and standing guard through the long night. Days later, riders returned from the city with proof. The mining company had poisoned the creek. Silas Pewitt had taken bribes to stay silent. Shame fell heavy over Belwick. Valora was cleared of every charge. Her name was spoken with regret instead of hate. You saved us, the pastor said quietly. I did what a healer does, Valora replied. They offered her a house, a position, a chance to return. Valora looked at Thorley, at the forest, at the life she'd rebuilt from ashes. No, she said gently. But I will help anyone who comes. And she did. Seasons passed. A healing house rose beside Thorley's cabin, built by his hands and filled with her knowledge. People came from many towns. Some whispered. Most thanked her. All left healed or comforted. One spring evening, as the sun dipped low, Thorley took Valora's hands. When I found you, he said, you were dying. She smiled softly. I lived because you stood between me and the cold. He shook his head. You lived because you chose to. They married beneath the open sky, surrounded by people who once feared her and now trusted her. Valora Finch became Valora Blackwood. Not by losing herself, but by finding where she truly belonged. They had abandoned her to starve during winter. But she survived. And she became something stronger than fear.